This broke waitress gave a Russian mobster $30 million of her Mafia boyfriend's money. Why would anyone cross Dante Varley, the ruthless king of Chicago's underworld? Because it was the only way to save his life. To stop a deadly gang war, Arya handed over the keys to his entire empire. He told her he never wanted to see her again. But the truth behind her betrayal will absolutely shock you.
Listen up, guys. You and I need to pause right on this exact frame. We have absolute chaos in a super fancy Chicago restaurant. Crystal glass is shattered on the floor, completely killing the rich person vibe. This is where our insane tragedy kicks off. Our girl Arya stands there frozen, broken glass looking like literal diamonds drowning in red juice. Across the room sits Dante Varley, a massive mob boss who built his underground empire on pure nightmare fuel. He lowers his napkin, looking straight up predatory, and their eyes lock. Anyone else would be begging for their life right now, but Arya literally just rolls her eyes. Honestly, it teaches us something real. When you hit rock bottom and have zero left to lose, simply not caring anymore becomes your absolute strongest shield. So this place, the Riverbend, is a massive VIP shadow cave, where being quiet is the currency and a loud step is a felony. Arya has been stuck in this shiny prison for 3 brutal months, and her hands still shake every time she puts on her uniform. She is balancing 4 crystal glasses that literally cost more than her entire rent. Table 7 ordered a vintage wine so rare that 2 managers had to open it. She closes her eyes, whispering to herself that she can do this. We all tell ourselves those little lies, hoping the confidence actually kicks in. But here is a brutal life lesson for you guys. Pretending to be brave almost never stops a massive disaster from coming straight for your neck. Arya is desperately begging her heart to chill out, trying to ignore how insanely hot the room is. But then, ultimate disaster strikes. Her worn-out shoe catches on a slightly raised floor tile, and guys, it is completely game over. Time literally goes into slow motion. She has to stand there and watch her entire livelihood slide right off that silver tray. The super expensive crystal does a backflip through the light before absolutely exploding against the cold marble floor. The loud crash completely wrecks the fake peaceful vibe of the entire restaurant. It is seriously wild how life hands out lessons like this. You can walk carefully, follow all the rules, and do everything perfectly for years, but one tiny trip up can bring you crashing right back down to rock bottom. Every head in that fancy room whips around. Arya drops to the floor, her hands shaking over a massive puddle of vintage wine that honestly looks exactly like a crime scene. When she slowly looks up, she locks eyes directly with Dante Varley. Everyone in Chicago knows this guy is a total monster hiding behind expensive suits. Check this out though. Having a dark reputation is literally like wearing a heavy anchor, and it drags everyone around you straight down. Dante is chilling in the darkest corner booth, watching every single door like a hawk. He has 3 massive muscle guys standing around him like brick walls. Their eyes are totally dead, completely wiped of any normal human feelings because of the absolutely crazy stuff they have done in the Mafia underworld. These bodyguards are wearing coats that completely fail to hide their massive weapons, constantly scanning the terrified rich people. But Dante is the main event. He is not some ugly monster from a scary story. The guy looks like a tragic masterpiece with a sharp jawline and a serious scar. He is rocking a charcoal suit like it is combat armor, and his suffocating stare is locked on Arya. The whole place stops breathing. A kitchen timer is going off like crazy in the back, but nobody even moves. In the middle of this pure panic, Arya just falls back on her basic waitress training. It is a huge reality for all of us. When you are absolutely terrified out of your mind, sticking to a simple daily routine is the only thing that keeps you from completely drowning. Running on pure survival mode, Arya throws a white towel over the red mess, her hands shaking out of control. She whispers an apology to the floor, her pride totally destroyed. Then her manager, Robert, starts high yelling, and you can literally hear his 15-year career flashing before his eyes. He is a strict guy who is completely losing his mind over Dante being there. He tells her to stand up, and she slowly rises, holding that soaked towel to her chest like a tragic flag. Her uniform is totally ruined, completely exposing her huge mistake to the room. You know what the worst part of messing up is? It is not the actual mistake itself. It is having to stand there and publicly wear the visible stains of your absolute worst failures, while a bunch of cold people silently judge you. That dark wine is spreading across her stomach, like a straight-up horror movie wound. Her face is burning red while Robert glares at her like she just ruined his entire life. He tells her to go to his office after her shift, which is basically restaurant code for getting permanently fired. Arya is totally ready to just swallow her pride and beg for her job. But right before she can even speak, this insanely smooth voice cuts right through the tension. Dante tells the manager that he is going to talk to her first. He stands up, moving like a literal predator. Robert looks absolutely terrified and tries to say it is not necessary. Dante does not even blink and just says he is not asking. It honestly proves a massive point. True, heavy power never actually has to yell to completely own a room. Let us break this crazy dynamic down together, you and I. Those simple words from Dante totally destroyed the manager. Robert just shuts his mouth, completely crushed by the Mafia boss energy, radiating off Dante. This guy stops right in front of Arya, invading her space. Up close, you can see the wild history of his life, the crazy scar, those empty eyes, the insane tension in his jaw. Every basic instinct is screaming at Arya to look down, but here is the massive plot twist. Being broke makes you a special kind of tired, and she simply has zero energy left to be scared. She looks right back at him and tells him to speed up the threats because she has tables waiting. It shows us something super real. Hitting rock bottom completely burns away your fear, leaving behind pure, reckless courage. The silence gets so heavy you could practically feel your ribs cracking. One of Dante's massive hitmen steps up, ready to cause serious damage. But Dante just raises 2 fingers, and the giant freezes. Dante asks for her name, sounding completely dead inside. Arya fires right back, telling him he already heard the manager say it. The room drops 10 degrees. Dante stares her down and says he needs to hear it from her. Like a boss, she stares directly into his eyes, which honestly feels like looking down the barrel of a loaded weapon, and drops her name, Arya Bennett. He repeats it slowly. Then he asks if she likes her job, and someone in the background gasps. It is a crazy lesson, guys. In the real world, a quietly spoken question is always way more dangerous than a drawn weapon. That weird gasping noise was definitely Robert, who was basically having a full panic attack. But then, the wildest thing happens. The scary mask on Dante's breaks for a second, and he looks amused. He points out that most people freak out when he stands near them. Arya claps back immediately, saying that most people have stuff to lose. Her mom always said her sarcastic mouth would get her in trouble, and right now that feels super accurate. Dante just looks at her like she is some kind of glitch in the Matrix. He realizes she is not afraid. She whispers that she is terrified, but she is so broke she literally lacks the energy to beg. Honestly, Life is exactly like that sometimes. Dropping your guard and giving brutal honesty is the only way to disarm the monsters standing in your way. Robert chokes on his fear, trying to scold Arya. Dante casually raises one hand, shutting the manager down like a king. Then he asks the terrifying question, how much does that spilled wine cost? Arya looks at the red puddle and admits it is more than she makes in 3 months. Robert whines that it is $4,000 a bottle. Guys, she dropped 2 of them. An $8,000 debt hits Arya like a freight train, crushing her. Dante never takes his eyes off her. Without missing a beat, he tells Robert to put the penalty on his tab. The whole room takes a breath of relief, and Robert starts thanking him. But listen closely, because this is crucial. A favor from a dangerous boss is never a rescue mission. It is a velvet collar locking tight around your neck. Guys, listen to this absolute madness. Dante straight up demands dinner in the private wing, no debate, and says she has to be the one serving him. Robert, the manager, completely freaks out and tries to bring up company rules. Big mistake. Dante just hits him with this deadly stare, and Robert immediately folds like a cheap lawn chair. Survival completely overrules company policy, right? Then Dante looks at Arya like she is his brand new obsession and gives her exactly 4 minutes to get moving. Her manager grabs her arm in the broken glass, completely panicked. But here is a simple truth we all need to remember. When the biggest, baddest predator in the room specifically invites you into his private den, your normal life is already gone forever. Listen to this absolute chaos. Robert leans over that steel counter, his voice dropping into a full panic. He demands to know if she has any idea who this guy is, because she just talked back to the ultimate apex predator of the city. Arya just stands there with hollow eyes, whispering that her brain completely shut down. Robert tells her to grab a fresh uniform, stare at the floor, and completely disappear. She desperately asks what the mob boss actually wants. Robert is terrified. He tells her he knows nothing and wants to keep it that way, because if she wakes up the monster, nobody is coming to save her. It leaves us with a real lesson for the real world. When you stand right in the shadow of a true monster, losing your cool is always a fatal mistake. Picture the tension as Arya walks up that dimly lit staircase. The silence is so heavy it feels like a physical weight crushing her. That dining room is built to be a pure isolation chamber, and her heart is absolutely hammering. She keeps smoothing her apron, giving off major prey energy as she tries to look harmless. Inside, Dante is sitting perfectly still, soaking in the cold light of the Chicago skyline. He totally ditched his guards just to throw her off balance. Arya freezes at the door, trapped between her screaming gut, telling her to run away, and the gravity of his Mafia boss command. Always remember this simple piece of wisdom. If your gut is begging you to run from a quiet room, you have to turn around and leave before the heavy wooden door clicks shut behind you. You have to watch exactly how this dangerous mob boss sets the trap. It always starts with super quiet commands. Shut the door. Bring the plate over here. Take a seat. This is the dark art of breaking someone down. The second she pushes that heavy oak door shut, the latch echoes like a massive bank vault locking her inside. Her hands are shaking out of control, totally giving away her fear. Then he tells her to sit down, completely ripping away the safety net of being a normal waitress. He forces her to say his actual first name, planting the seeds for a massive trauma bond right on the spot. Here is a life lesson you should never forget. Saying yes to tiny, politely phrased demands is usually the exact thing that ends up locking us inside our own psychological cages. Look at how intense this gets. The guy drops a threat on the table without blinking, staring her down like a predator. Then he flips the script entirely, feeding her this crazy lie that she is somehow super special. He paints himself as a tragic, misunderstood mafia kingpin who everyone either uses or runs away from. When Arya tries to play dumb, Dante pulls off the mask completely. He straight up admits he only let her mess up earlier so he could sit back and watch her panic. It sounds completely insane, but it is actually a cold test of her boundaries. Keep this simple truth close to your heart. The people who quietly sit back and study your flaws are never looking for a real connection. They just want to find out exactly how hard they have to push to finally break you. It is crazy how a glass of wine suddenly feels like pure torture. Dante demands all her secrets while giving nothing back, letting his massive power crush her. Arya is literally shaking, and her mental defenses totally collapse. She confesses she is just a failed artist, desperately hoping he will think she is too boring to bother with. But Dante just smirks and twists the knife. He whispers that he truly sees her, hitting a bullseye right on her deepest loneliness. Her panic is completely justified right now. It gives us a harsh but necessary lesson for life. Never hand your deepest insecurities over to the person holding all the power, because they will happily turn your pain into the exact chains they use to keep you trapped forever. You and I are watching a masterclass in manipulation right now. Dante puts on this flawless mask of being completely vulnerable. He stares into his drink and claims he has been emotionally dead inside for 12 long years, playing the tragic, lonely mafia god. Then he drops the ultimate trap. He tells Arya that her quiet attitude was the only thing strong enough to pierce his armor. By making her out to be his savior, he drops massive pressure onto her shoulders. She just freezes up, completely lost on how to handle this fake broken guy routine. Always remember this stark warning. When a dangerous predator suddenly drops to its knees to show you how much they are bleeding, it is always a calculated setup meant to completely consume your precious empathy. Check out this insanely calculated move. Dante walks away and stands by the huge glass window. This creates a weird empty space, silently forcing Arya to emotionally reach out toward his dark silhouette. He demands she tell him one real truth, claiming his whole mafia world is built on fake loyalty. He is mining her deepest trauma just to force a connection. Even as her brain is screaming at her to bolt for the door, the trap pulls tighter. She ends up crying and confessing her biggest fear, which is fading away into nothing. The takeaway here is massive. Real human connection requires a solid foundation of safety. Making a forced confession inside a gilded cage only ever hands the smiling warden the master keys to your mind. When Dante whispers that he truly sees her, it is game over. That twisted validation is the exact drug her wrecked self-esteem is craving, and the trauma bond is totally locked in. She is stammering, completely overwhelmed. But then, a phone rings and shatters the mood. In a wild switch, the fake broken guy completely vanishes. His spine straightens up, and the cold-blooded apex predator is back in charge. He turns to walk out, but casually drops a line saying they are not finished yet. By leaving that tension hanging, he plants this massive seed of pure dread right in her chest. The steel trap has officially snapped shut. The lesson here is written in cold blood. Never mistake the quiet, calculating stillness of a hunting wolf for a moment of genuine peace and safety. Stick with me, because this tragic downward spiral is wild. It started in that quiet room where just saying his name felt like poison. She ignored her screaming intuition. She tried to stand her ground, telling him seeing him again was a mistake, but Dante just gave her a calculated smirk, acting like a predator wearing a flawless mask of warmth. Once that heavy door shut, Aria was totally paralyzed. Her physical body instantly recognized the monster her brain was trying to rationalize. She had no idea she was stepping straight into a nightmare of ruthless mobsters who feel absolutely nothing. The truth here is seriously chilling. We often walk right past the brightest red flags in our lives simply because the darkness knows exactly how to smile beautifully. Her shift ends in a total blur of dissociation. Her manager avoids her, sensing the dark shadow the Mafia boss left behind. And that massive tip, that is not generosity. That is straight up financial grooming. An early down payment to buy her surrender. She rides the train home, lost in cognitive dissonance, obsessing over his claim that his heart has been dead for 12 years. Her apartment feels totally empty, offering only a freezing draft to keep her anchored to reality. By 2 in the morning, her terror explodes onto a blank canvas. She frantically paints the suffocating dread. She is too scared to speak out loud. It reveals a heartbreaking reality of human nature. When we are completely terrified and unable to scream, our minds will always find a frantic, desperate way to bleed that panic out into the world. Swallowed by derealization, Aria sits on her bed and eats a cheap meal just to remind her body it is alive. She tries to convince herself the mob encounter was a bad dream. Suddenly, her phone lights up. An unknown number. It is Dante, telling her they are not done. A grounded person would block him instantly. Instead, the toxic roots of that trauma bond take hold. She replies and asks how he found her. Dante hits her back with a chilling display of absolute control. He perfectly recites her entire life story, completely ripping away her privacy to prove his total dominance over her existence. The life lesson here is incredibly grim, but undeniably true. When a dangerous predator effortlessly proves that your walls cannot protect you, your natural human instinct to fight back will simply crumble into ash. Look at this, guys. The camera is locked on Aria's shaking hands as Dante straight up dissects her entire existence. He weaponizes her empty bank account, calling out her unpaid rent like a total savage. Pure panic crashes over her, and she confesses fear out loud. Dante fires back with a masterclass in fake vulnerability, claiming he is just bad at being human. By painting his toxic red flags as some tragic character flaw, he totally hooks her caretaker instincts. She romanticizes his lack of empathy, seeing a bleeding wound instead of a lethal trap. Ignoring every survival instinct, she tells him everyone is just pretending. Boom. She just locked herself in a psychological cage. You and I need to recognize this tragic truth right here. Empathy is a beautiful gift, but handing it to a starving wolf will only guarantee you get eaten alive. Check out this text exchange, because it feels way more like a cold interrogation than a date. He asks for a meetup, and her internal sirens go crazy. She knows exactly who Dante is, a ruthless mob boss who snaps his enemies in half without blinking. But guys, her emotions are already totally compromised. She zeroes in on a tiny crack in his armor, projecting her own deep fear of being a nobody onto his emptiness. It brings us to a hard lesson we all eventually learn. We constantly fool ourselves into believing our love alone can cure a literal monster. She agrees to meet at Millennium Park at 2 o'clock, trying to set a tiny boundary about her work shift. He promises she will not be late, wrapping his control in a fake blanket of care. She has every chance to block his number and walk away, yet she steps straight into the roaring fire. She completely ditches her last shot at saving herself, firing off a single text that seals her absolute doom. What happens next is a brutal night of zero sleep, her brain running way too hot to shut down. By 2 o'clock, the park is just a dizzying maze of loud crowds. Arya is standing right in front of that giant steel monument, staring at her warped reflection. It is such a brilliant, cinematic parallel for her fracturing identity. Before leaving the house, she changed outfits 5 different times just to manage her insane anxiety. She finally goes with beat-up denim and a heavy jacket, building a subconscious layer of armor. The lesson here is simple but deep. We often try to mask our most painful emotional wounds with superficial choices, hoping a thick coat can somehow protect a fragile mind from the sheer danger it is walking right into. Her brain basically short-circuits the exact second this guy shows up. When Dante speaks, her entire body betrays her with a massive flinch. He keeps a totally calculated distance, rocking dark shades even though the sky is completely gray. Guys, these are pure Mafia dominance displays, set up to hide his eyes and make him look untouchable. Their tense chat goes in circles about how promises are basically garbage. Then, out of nowhere, he drops his ultimate weapon. He pulls off the sunglasses, showing her this flawless, manufactured look of pure nervousness. It brings up a really chilling life lesson. Predators always know exactly what their target desperately needs to see. By faking genuine anxiety, he flawlessly brainwashes his willing victim into walking right beside him, pulling her deep into the shady maze of those public gardens. Dante keeps that calculated space between them, a deliberate flex of restraint meant to make his prey feel completely safe. When he casually asks about her painting, he is straight up hunting for her emotional weak spots. Arya thinks about lying, which is our natural human defense mechanism kicking in. But a mob boss like him has this terrifying gravity that demands absolute compliance. Her voice is shaking as she admits to survive the heavy weight of her reality, throwing wild colors on the canvas when life gets too dark. By pulling out this personal secret, Dante cleanly hacks right past her outer walls. The life lesson here is one we cannot afford to ignore. The very second we confess our deepest survival tactics to a predator, we literally hand them the exact blueprint they need to build our permanent cage. Arya straight up confesses that her art makes her feel less like a ghost. Just watch how ruthlessly Dante weaponizes this bleeding wound. He drags them to a completely dead zone in the park, far away from the safety of normal people. Then, he flat out orders her to take him to her apartment. Her first reaction is totally normal because inviting a literal crime syndicate boss into your house is insane. But he just closes the gap, invading her personal bubble to assert total physical dominance. He whispers that he has not felt a single thing in 12 years, using fake trauma as a massive hook. She sees the red flags, literally telling the guy out loud that he is dangerous. This brings us to a super tragic human flaw. We can hear the alarm bells screaming in our ears, yet we still choose to sit perfectly still inside a house that is burning to the ground. Stick with me here, because the psychology of this scene is absolutely wild. The mob boss silently tests his grip on her. He reaches out so slow, giving her a totally fake chance to run, before his fingers even brush her face. His touch is crazy gentle, fully engineered to scramble her brain into static. He whispers that she is not going to run, literally deleting her free will on the spot. Cornered, Arya demands he tell her one real truth. The Dante then drops the biggest cheat code of any manipulator, the illusion of a tortured soul. He claims he is sick of being a monster, crying that her eyes make him feel human. He paints himself as a dying beast begging to be saved. Empathy is a stunning human trait, but here is the brutal reality. When empathy is handed to someone with zero conscience, it stops being a superpower and becomes a totally fatal weakness. The camera creeps in as she whispers her total surrender. The vibe in the room violently flips the second her apartment door clicks shut. Dante does not just walk in, his massive aura literally sucks all the oxygen out of the space. He stands right in the middle, his pitch black eyes soaking in all the chaotic, bloody red and purple paint splashed across her canvases. He reads her deep trauma in those aggressive brushstrokes, validating her pain by calling the brutal artwork totally honest. By praising her darkest pieces, he instantly rebrands himself as her one and only savior. This exposes a really painful truth about human nature that we all have to get. Truly dangerous people do not care about the bright light inside you. They carefully study the dark corners where you hide, just waiting for the perfect moment to kick the door in. We are watching a complete psychological teardown happen, frame by chilling frame. Dante moves in close, hyping up her raw honesty, swearing she is the only person on earth keeping it real. He puts her on this massive pedestal above the rest of society, which is textbook trauma bonding 101. He crosses the floorboards in 3 massive strides, the heat coming off his body and that heavy hit of expensive cologne totally fry her rational brain. He leans in and whispers she is the first real thing he has touched in a solid decade. In that one single breath, Arya feels every defensive wall she ever built turn to absolute dust. She tries to call out the insane danger standing right in front of her, but she chokes on the words. The hardest life lesson to swallow is this. When a truly lonely person finally feels seen, basic self-preservation just melts away. These dark shadows cut across his jaw as he speaks her absolute worst fears out loud, validating her urge to bolt while silently locking her in place. His thumb slowly traces her shaking cheekbone. He literally begs for just one quiet night away from being the mob's top monster. Any normal, healthy brain would be sprinting out the back door right now, but this insane cocktail of pure dread and blind empathy totally overrides her system. She pushes up on her toes and actually kisses the guy. That fragile moment instantly explodes into a hungry, chaotic confirmation that she is totally trapped. He crushes her against his chest, physically locking down his brand new prize. They break apart and he drops the bomb that this changes everything. We can learn a massive lesson here, guys. True control is not about locking someone in a cage. It happens when the prisoner gladly swallows the key. You and I are watching the exact second a toxic trauma bond turns into pure concrete. Dante does not bother with any fake promises. He flat out refuses to guarantee she will be safe, painting his underground empire in the darkest shades of absolute violence. Instead of running for the hills, Arya demands to see the darkest parts of his soul, making the fatal mistake of confusing shared trauma with real love. They sit on that freezing floor for hours, trading their worst nightmares. He breaks down her bloody climb to the top of the syndicate. She hands over her deepest insecurities, sobbing about her dead-end career and sick mom. He completely strips away all the fake Hollywood glamour of the Mafia life. He understands a terrifying truth about human nature, handing us a life lesson we must never ignore. When you mix pure terror with a flash of vulnerability, you forge the heaviest chains ever made. He breaks down the nightmare of his daily grind, talking casually about hidden graves and wiping out rival gangs. He spins his cold, dead heart as a tragic sacrifice, whispering that he became so untouchable He forgot how it feels to be loved. Arya is sitting there completely hooked, feeding his massive ego the exact validation it is starving for. She feels like her heart is breaking and healing at the exact same second. Then, out of nowhere, a ringing cell phone shatters the quiet vibe. The second Dante answers that call, the sad, broken boy routine is totally gone. The ruthless Mafia boss snaps right back into his rigid posture. It brings us to a super harsh but necessary life lesson. A highly dangerous person's soft side is never the beginning of a beautiful redemption story. It is just another weapon in their arsenal, boxed right back up the second real-life calls. Bro, look at this absolute mastermind, Dante. He hangs up the phone and fakes a perfectly pained look, acting like he is so torn between staying and handling his Mafia business. He mutters about some situation he has to fix. She is so desperate to stay in his toxic world that she plays the totally understanding girlfriend. He plants a deep kiss on her, pure manipulation to keep her hooked. The second he bounces, her apartment feels dead. She touches her lips, drowning in a crazy dopamine hit. She literally invited the devil inside and is begging for more. Then, boom, a wild text from her manager ruins the vibe. Honestly, here is a real-life lesson. No matter how safe your little fantasy bubble feels, it is always going to shatter against the cold, hard concrete of reality. Let us look at this piece by piece, guys. The camera pans over the gritty Chicago skyline, and down in the streets, Arya is feeling icy dread in her gut. But instead of running for the hills, she retreats right back into her Delulu era. She is straight up romanticizing how Dante looked at her artwork, acting like he treated her soul like fragile glass. She takes his violent mob boss history and flips it into a tragic romance arc. She knows her soft vibe cannot survive his brutal Mafia reality, but she walks right into the flames anyway. She compares this deadly city to the guy who totally hijacked her brain, thinking he only stole her heart. You and I have probably both made this mistake. We tragically confuse the systematic destruction of our boundaries for an epic romance. Cut to the restaurant back office, and it is a total reality check. Robert is pacing around, literally sweating through his shirt, which is exactly how you react when a Mafia apex predator targets your spot. But Arya? She is just sitting there completely zoned out, totally blinded by a massive trauma bond. She calmly asks if she is getting fired, treating this mob-level crisis like she just dropped a cheap plate. Robert lets out a crazy laugh, trying to snap her out of her delusion. He drops the bomb that 3 board members already called, freaking out about how he got the Don into their dining room. Arya just blinks like a deer in headlights. Listen up. Sometimes the most dangerous place to be is inside our own comforting illusions. She is so stuck in her head that she cannot even see the absolute chokehold this boss has on the entire city. This absolute menace is closing his trap like a chess grandmaster. Robert wipes the sweat off his face and tells her Dante booked the private room and specifically demanded Arya as his waitress. Guys, look at her face here. Instead of realizing this is a toxic, territorial Mafia flex, she actually blushes. She thinks this trap is just cute, romantic flattery. Robert looks sick, realizing his worker is the newest obsession of Chicago's deadliest Don. Arya just shrugs it off, acting super innocent. Robert is backed into a corner. Say no and get wrecked, or say yes and watch the chaos unfold. Arya quietly agrees to take the VIP table. It is honestly heartbreaking to watch someone just give up the fight. Surrendering to a violent undertow never saves you. It only drags you quietly to the bottom. Robert is literally leaning across the desk, doing everything to smash her Delulu mindset. He drops the facts straight up telling her Dante is a ruthless killer who wipes people out with his bare hands, but Arya instantly throws up her emotional shields. She gets so defensive over a guy who just stared at her paintings and gave her one fake, desperate kiss. This crazy need to protect the villain is the ultimate proof of a trauma bond. But deep down, a tiny part of her brain actually hears Robert. She knows she has only seen the shiny, fake Mafia boss mask. Take notes, because here is a hard truth we all need to remember when dealing with toxic people. Predators never show their sharpest teeth while they are still coaxing you into their cage. They wait until the door locks. Arya swears she will be careful, but that is the biggest cap of the century. The toxic urge to run back to her mobster completely overrides her common sense. She is shaking while texting him about the reservation. And boom, he replies instantly. It is a calculated flex to make her feel like a VIP. He types that the distance is driving him crazy and begs her to come early. This is the ultimate psychological trap. By making Arya think she is the only girl who can melt his frozen heart, he locks down her blind loyalty. She is grinning at her phone, ignoring the giant red flags wrapping around her neck. Always remember this vital lesson. When a known monster swears you are the rare exception to their cruelty, you are never the exception. You are just their next victim. This is the exact second her brain breaks. Earlier, she agreed to a 4 p.m. meetup while pretending she was super busy, faking a laugh to hide her massive panic from a passing executive. Back in her dark apartment, she stands under a boiling shower, literally trying to shock her brain back to reality. She stares into the foggy mirror, completely dissociating. We often lose our identity the moment we let a dangerous person define our worth. Just 48 hours ago, she was a nobody. Now, an insane mafia kingpin is flexing his entire empire just to brainwash her. Suddenly, her phone buzzes. Caller ID is blank. She answers, and this cold, super professional female voice rings out. She says her name is Victoria Cross. The plot is officially thickening. Stick with me, because you and I are about to unpack exactly how trauma bonding ruins a life. The bomb drops when a nosy reporter calls her up, asking about her secret ties to Dante Varelli. Bro, her nervous system literally crashes on the spot. She goes into full denial mode, snapping at the guy and lying that she has no clue who Dante is. But the journalist goes harder, bringing up the Don's sketchy visit to her apartment. When he warns her about Dante's massive body count, Arya just slams the phone down. The truth is always terrifying when we build our comfort on a dangerous lie. She starts having a total panic attack as unknown numbers spam her phone. Then, a single text cuts through the absolute madness. It is the big boss himself. The spiderweb is finally closing in. Look at the absolute audacity of this text. Dante straight up orders her to ignore the haters, promising he will handle the mafia drama. Guys, this is textbook manipulator behavior. By acting like her knight in shining armor, he is actually locking her inside an isolated, paranoid cage. Arya is practically begging for a safe space, but he drags her into his underworld, a dark nightmare where privacy is completely dead. True safety never requires you to block out the rest of the world just to find peace. Her anxiety is completely maxed out. While she is having this epic mental breakdown, a familiar ringtone blasts through the room. She picks up, and it is her own mother. Her mom is screaming through the phone, hitting her with a mix of pure rage and sheer terror. This scene with her mom is actually brutal to watch. The mom saw the crazy media rumors and is demanding to know why her kid is hooking up with a literal crime boss. Arya is backed into a corner and starts downplaying the whole thing. She claims it is just a waitress serving rich VIP. But Mom is not stupid. She instantly clocks the toxic Mafia dynamic. Her voice is shaking as she begs Arya to wake up, warning her that Underworld sociopaths do not love people. They just consume them. They suck your soul dry until you are nothing but a hollow shell. It is a harsh, brutal fact we all try to ignore when we feel lonely. Predators do not nurture the beautiful things they claim to care about. They just feed on them until there is nothing left but dust. Notice how the camera zooms right into Arya's face, showing her brain literally short-circuiting. She promises her mom she gets the danger, but her shaky voice completely exposes her own massive lies. We really cannot lie to other people without lying to ourselves first. She hangs up and just sits in the dark, staring at her art. Suddenly, those paintings stop looking like cute masterpieces and start looking like giant flashing red warning signs. As she commutes to the restaurant, she goes into full-blown panic mode. Her eyes are darting everywhere. Every random guy with a newspaper or girl on a phone looks like an undercover mob hitman. She can literally taste the paranoia. By the time she hits those restaurant doors, her anxiety is absolutely off the charts. Okay, brace yourselves for the main event. Arya walks into the private VIP room, her heart basically exploding out of her chest. Dante is chilling by the window, pulling off the ultimate psychological flex. He ditched his fancy suit and steamed black lipstick and rolled up his sleeves to show off this massive dark Mafia tattoo. He is literally shedding his armor just to make her feel safe. Master manipulators always drop their guard just enough to make you drop yours. He gives her this crazy, smug smirk because he knows he already won. When she freaks out about the leaked news, he stays ice cold. He blames it on a random photographer. Notice how smoothly he shifts the blame, low-key reminding her that he controls the entire city, wrapping her even tighter in his twisted Mafia web. Let us kick this off, because you and I are about to see a complete masterclass in toxic manipulation. Arya finally realizes she is in way over her head and tries to backpedal, but Dante closes the gap in 3 steps and grabs her. Then he drops the absolute nuke of guilt trips. He whispers that he spent 12 years dead inside, rotting in the dark, until she literally dropped a wine glass and revived his soul. It is absolute insanity, but brilliantly evil. He paints her as his one and only savior, instantly hooking her into a wild, romantic fantasy. Listen, the biggest lesson here is simple. The most dangerous trap is the one that makes you feel like a hero for staying. Just look at the pure psychological warfare happening right in front of us. Dante does not even try to hide the massive danger he brings to her life. Instead, he completely flips the script. He spins the crazy media leaks and her mom totally freaking out as just a small price to pay for his emotional rescue. He pulls her in, begging of one shot to prove he is worth the absolute chaos. Then he hits her with a heavy kiss, completely melting her logic. Her brain is screaming to run, but she stays honestly. It is a tough truth to swallow. A toxic situation wrapped in sweet affection is always the hardest cage to break out of. The camera pauses on Arya, standing in this totally chaotic restaurant, desperately trying to pretend she has any control left. Dante just casually orders her upstairs closet, literally erasing her job with 2 whispered words to her boss. He is pulling all the strings. Going totally against her survival instincts, she agrees, but demands his absolute truth in exchange. She actually thinks this gives her some power. But watch her hands literally shaking as she drops the glasses. She is completely disconnected from reality now. The takeaway here is brutally clear. Gambling your own safety just to finally feel appreciated is a bet that will always leave you with nothing. Stick with me here, because you and I are about to watch her step straight off a cliff. Her manager basically kicks her off the floor, knowing she is a total wreck. Upstairs, Dante has the room looking like some dark, moody Mafia movie set. Low firelight and breathing wine. When Arya asks for the truth, she goes straight for the kill and asks for his actual body count. A normal guy would panic, but Dante just does the math. Stone cold, he admits to 4 personal hits and dozens more from the shadows. The lesson to remember is sharp. Never confuse a monster speaking calmly for a man who is actually sane, because absolute darkness usually whispers. Check out the terrifying way he just stands there, totally empty. He gives absolutely zero apologies for the lives he ended. He basically holds up a mirror and dares her to call him a villain. And right here, her defenses completely crumble to dust. Instead of running from a literal hitman, Arya dives head first into the deep end. She clings to the memory of his gentle touch and that crazy kiss, trying to convince herself that people are just a mix of good and bad. But here is a fact of life we all need to hear. If you try to fix a shattered person by ignoring their darkest secrets, you are only going to end up breaking yourself in the process. Desperation will make you build bridges out of absolute thin air. Trying to cross this massive moral gap, Arya actually confesses her own tiny sin. Her voice is shaking as she admits she stole some cheap paints while her mom was sick, just because she needed an escape. Dante flawlessly plays the tragic villain role. He nods, treating her petty theft with the same gravity as his mob hits, whispering that both come from the exact same need to survive. It is totally unhinged, but it teaches us something real. Never compromise your own morals just to feel a connection with someone who is completely lost in the dark. Let us take a quick pause to dig into his seriously messed up backstory together. Arya pushes him to talk about his very first hit. The lighting gets super moody as Dante explains he was only 19. His own Mafia boss dad forced him to execute a traitor. He talks about the absolute physical sickness and the totally sleepless nights that followed. But then comes the crazy plot twist. He literally locked away his own humanity in a mental vault. It reminds us of a hard truth. Monsters are usually created by the people supposed to protect them, but terrible childhood trauma never excuses the absolute nightmare they choose to become as adults. Just look at her expression in this totally tragic scene. She actually thinks she is the magic key opening his mental vault. Her pity completely mutates into a full-blown savior complex. She reaches out and grabs the hands of a literal killer, wondering if she has completely lost her mind for loving a guy made of pure violence. Dante does not even try to sugarcoat it. He looks her dead in the eye and promises he will drag her straight down into the mud, but he still grips her hands like a vice. Here is the life lesson. You cannot love the damage out of someone who only uses your bright light to survive their own personal darkness. This is the exact moment the trap officially locks down. Anyone with a shred of survival instinct would be sprinting for the nearest exit right now, but Arya does the exact opposite. Fueled by pure, reckless desperation, she walks around that table and kisses him. It is a crazy, frantic collision because they both know this reality is going to explode eventually. Dante rests his forehead against hers and asks her to crash at his secret safe house. And she just agrees, wanting nothing more than to wake up next to him. It just goes to show you that loneliness is a massive liar. It will always try to convince you that a burning building is a safe place to hide. Every single warning light in her brain has to be flashing red right now. The emotional pacing of this is moving at lightning speed, pulling her straight under the waves. But her crushing loneliness completely overrides any basic logic she has left. They sneak out the back exit into the freezing night and slide into a slick black sedan. Dante keeps his hand planted firmly on her lower back, claiming his territory. They pull up to this gorgeous, quiet brownstone that feels totally peaceful. But do not let the luxury fool you. The truth is that a beautifully decorated cage is still a prison, no matter how soft the velvet feels against your skin. The camera pans around this massive place, showing off a perfectly normal-looking life. Exposed brick, nice floors, and a kitchen that actually looks used. Dante casually drops that his fancy glass penthouse was just a fake stage for his mafia life. Then he really sets the hook, telling her that absolutely nobody has stepped foot in this real house for 5 straight years. He puts her right on a massive pedestal, completely weaponizing her desperate need to feel special. If you and I take away anything from this absolute drama, it should be this. Being the chosen one for a highly dangerous person is never a flex. It is just a perfectly custom-built trap. She immediately spots this massive painting as an art major. It is a literal masterpiece worth crazy money. The canvas is just absolute chaos, packed with slashed reds and dark bruised blacks, but somehow held together by this super strict structure. It is basically a perfect mirror of Dante himself, totally brutal, but intensely controlled. He leads her into the bedroom, and what happens next is insanely slow and gentle, totally opposite to his violent mafia world. But never forget this simple piece of wisdom. The softest, most careful touch from a deeply dangerous man is usually hiding the absolute sharpest knife. In the quiet shadows of the bedroom, she traces all the crazy damage on his skin. A nasty knife scar across his ribs, a brutal bullet graze on his shoulder. Every single mark is a loud reminder of his unhinged, violent lifestyle. When she softly asks if his past still haunts him, he drops the ultimate romantic line, whispering that only her touch stops the bleeding. Tangled up in the sheets, he admits he is falling totally in love with her, but in the very same breath, promises he will completely ruin her life. The life lesson here is written in bold letters. When someone shows you their absolute darkness and warns you they will destroy you, believe them. A massive wave of heartbreak hits her right in the chest. She grips his arm, literally begging this mafia boss not to break her into pieces. Dante plays the tragic, cursed lover perfectly, burying his face in her hair and admitting he does not know any other way to live. This is the ultimate peak of toxic romance. She sees a totally broken man and decides he is a project she has to fix. They fall asleep like 2 smashed puzzle pieces trying to fit together. But at 3 in the morning, she wakes up to find him staring out the window, totally alone in the dark. It proves one big thing. You can never fix a broken person who refuses to put in the work to heal themselves. You and I need to look closely at this insane framing. Dante refuses to even look at Aria right now. The warm vibes are totally gone, replaced by a voice that slices the room like a scalpel. He drops a massive reality bomb about how his underworld actually works. Enter Victor Clove, an absolute psychopath rival who spent 2 years hacking his way to the boss chair. Dante explains that Clove will not see her as a human, but as a shiny weapon to break him, and he would absolutely mail her back in pieces. Aria is literally gagging, trying to promise she will stay safe. But here is the real talk and a lesson for all of us. When you willingly dive headfirst into the deep, dark, shark-infested waters of life, you cannot cry when you realize the shallow end is gone forever. Stick with me here. You and I are watching a train wreck happen in slow motion. Dante shatters every illusion she had left, dragging the room into a suffocating shadow. There is zero chance of a happy ending here, just a fast track to a violent end. But watch Aria. She steps up and forces this mob boss to look her in the eyes. For years, she was practically a ghost and slinging coffee to randoms and starving for real connection. Now, she looks at this walking red flag and claims him as her savior. She prefers the blazing fire of his mob life over being invisible. It brings up a dark but true life lesson. People will literally chug a glass of poison with a massive smile, as long as it makes them feel like the main character for just 5 minutes. She goes full throttle into the crazy, whispering that if she gets taken out, at least she dies being seen. Dante pulls her close, literally breaking down, shaking in this tragic mix of a laugh and a sob. He calls her unhinged, and she just smiles against his chest. They are wrapped up in each other, racing against a clock that is ticking way too fast. Then morning hits, lighting up the city with a fake, peaceful sky. But the honeymoon phase shatters in 1 second with a single phone call. Viktor Kolov knows everything. The rat is real and the enemy is right at the door. It hits us with a brutal life lesson. No matter how tight you squeeze your eyes shut in the dark, the morning sun will always force you to pay the massive tab for your late night mistakes. The panic in the room is off the chart as Aria scrambles for a way out, but Dante is already playing 3-dimensional chess. He reveals he already hid her mom from the upcoming bloodbath. He grabs her face, and the camera zooms in on the pure terror in this mafia boss's eyes. He is not scared for his own skin. He is absolutely terrified for hers. He demands she follows his orders to the letter, hiding his total panic behind boss mode. He swears he will burn the entire city to the ground to keep her safe, but his voice completely cracks. His untouchable empire is literally crumbling over their heads. It drops a heavy truth on us. Sometimes, those massive defensive walls we build to keep the toxic world out just end up turning into the exact heavy stones that bury us alive. Let us pause and check her mindset. She signed up for this nightmare. Trading a boring, safe life to be the center of a mobster's universe. The next 3 days are a sickening blur of waitressing while having an internal meltdown. She flashes a fake customer service smile while her anxiety screams. The camera pans over, and Dante's heavy hitters are chilling in the diner booths. They have guns hidden under their suits, sipping terrible coffee and watching her every move. Dante calls this a security detail. To Aria, she is basically on lockdown in a high-stress prison. It is a harsh lesson, guys. Trading your personal freedom for a little bit of safety does not actually make you secure. It just puts you inside a much prettier cage with a way bigger lock on the door. Their routine rots into this creepy, fake version of a normal couple. After her shift, he drives her home, acting out a romance that is clearly doomed to end in a bloodbath. She cooks while he sits in the dark, watching her like he cannot understand how this domestic peace works. They sit in dead silence, using physical touch to block out the chaos waiting outside. Then, boom, day 4 hits and the bubble pops. Her phone starts buzzing like crazy at the diner. She sneaks into the restroom and stares at the glowing screen. 7 missed calls from the boss himself. 3 absolute panic texts. It is a total wake-up call for anyone watching. Just pretending a massive storm is not happening will never actually stop the heavy rain from totally caving in your living room roof. The text on her screen is straight up terrifying. Call me now. Her hands shake as she taps the glass. Dante picks up before the first ring drops. He tries to sound like the untouchable boss, but you can totally hear the raw panic underneath. He drops a massive nuke. Clov just hit one of his warehouses. 3 of Dante's top guys are bleeding out on the floor. And the sickest part, Clov left a stolen photo of Arya on the scene with GPS coordinates written right over her face. Midnight, Navy Pier. Show up alone, or she is tomorrow's tragic news headline. The takeaway here is absolutely brutal. In the cutthroat game of street power, falling in love is basically just handing your worst enemy the ultimate cheat code to completely destroy your entire life. Through that tiny phone speaker, you can hear heavy weapons getting loaded. Dante barks out orders. She has to run right now. His driver Marco is waiting out back, ready to dump her in an off-the-grid safe house. Arya is hyperventilating, begging to know when she will see him again. Dead silence. He has no answer. It hits her like a freight train. He is stashing her away so he can walk straight into a suicide mission. She begs him not to go to the pier, but this guy is totally locked in by his own twisted Mafia honor code. If he backs down, the streets run red. It teaches us a pretty miserable truth about life. The absolute worst, most inescapable traps we will ever find ourselves stuck inside are almost always built out of our own stubborn pride. Stick with me here, because this is where the mind of a mob boss gets totally fascinating. Guys like Dante survive by being emotionless robots with crazy backup plans. He knows drawing out a psycho like Clov requires a massive public battlefield. Navy Pier makes total sense on paper. But the second his desperate need to protect Arya crashes into his cold logic, the whole system short-circuits. The camera zeroes in on his stressed-out face as he tries to calm her down, flexing about how he has survived this dirty game for 15 years. But honestly, it is pure cope. It is a huge lie we all tell ourselves. We think surviving our past mistakes gives us magic armor for the future. But when you are facing a literal monster, your old lucky streaks mean absolutely zero. Now let us flip the camera back to Arya. We are witnessing the darkest glitch in the human brain right now. Her entire will to live is totally synced up with the mobster who ruined her life. She knows he is walking straight into a meat grinder. Dante offers her the ultimate golden ticket, a fast getaway car, massive stacks of cash, and a clean slate. He begs her to just go paint and be normal, hoping her art will save his soul. But it is way too late. She stares at the open exit door and kicks it shut. She does not want a safe life anymore. She only wants the man who built her cage. The tragedy of romance is wild, guys. We will gladly throw our own salvation in the trash if it means we get to burn up in the flames with the exact person we are obsessed with. They are using desperate confessions as a lifeline. Tears pour down her face as she yells into the phone. Dante drops his boss mask and admits his biggest weakness. She completely shattered his bulletproof vest and turned a cold monster into someone who actually cares. They refuse to say a real goodbye, clinging to the fake idea that they will reunite later. She hangs up, staring at her reflection in the dirty diner mirror. She is absolutely terrified, but her blood is boiling with pure adrenaline. We always forget this crazy truth. It is only when we are seconds away from losing absolutely everything that we finally wake up and feel truly alive. Running off that insane high, she ditches Marco, jumping onto a night train heading straight into the pitch-black war zone. You and I are going to follow her right into this shaky train car. Her face has totally changed. She looks locked in on one single goal, getting to the center of the chaos. If Dante thought she would stay in a boring safe house, he massively miscalculated how twisted their bond really is. The train speeds ahead, passing normal people completely oblivious to the gang war about to pop off. Her phone lights up in the dark, first Marco, then Dante spamming her. Without even blinking, she hits the power button and kills the device. By 11 p.m., Navy Pier is a creepy ghost town. The cold wind howls as she sneaks past the perimeter guards. It is a wild lesson to learn. Cold logic and basic survival instincts will always get completely crushed in a fight against a truly obsessed heart. Guys, we have to look at the framing of this final shot together. Running purely on adrenaline, Arya finds this busted old maintenance door from a childhood memory. The camera tracks her heavy boots, clanking up these rusty metal stairs until she hits a suspended catwalk looking right over the main plaza. From up there, she is basically playing God mode. She sees everything. The dead Ferris wheel in the back, the pitch-black shadows where the hitmen are waiting to strike. As midnight hits, this freezing fog rolls off the lake and completely swallows the pier. Her muscles are literally screaming, but she stays frozen. Then, boom. The dark coat of the man she loves steps out of the mist. Listen, the lesson here is real. True devotion is not staying safe and cozy. It is standing right at the edge of the abyss for someone else. The camera sweeps across the wet pavement as Dante struts into the frame. Bro is walking with the swagger of an apex predator who fully knows he is stepping straight into a snare. He is completely unarmed, just casually flexing his total invulnerability. Boom, the trap snaps shut. 6 armed mercenaries step out of the shadows, blocking every single exit. Right in the middle stands Viktor Kolov, a mobster with the cold eyes of a veteran sociopath. The thick fog eats all the sound, making the whole scene feel totally suffocating. Victor's voice slices through the mist, mocking Dante for being so incredibly predictable. It points to a harsh reality about human nature, honestly. Sometimes, the absolute boldest display of courage is just a heavy mask for a deep wish to finally be destroyed. Victor speaks super slow and heavy, using his voice to assert absolute dominance over the situation. When he asks about the girl, Dante keeps up his poker face, acting totally unbothered. But a narcissist like Victor gets his kicks out of wrecking his rival's reality. Slowly, the dude pulls out a physical prop. It is a tiny canvas, Arya's own artwork, snatched straight out of her safe apartment. The camera just locks onto Dante's eyes. This is a massive, totally devastating psychological critical hit. By flexing this stolen painting, Victor proves his guise breached the absolute inner circle. It forces us to confront a heartbreaking reality in our own lives. No matter how high we build our walls to protect the people we cherish, the darkest threats will always find a way to slip through the cracks. You and I are going to break down this nightmare together. This is the exact second a complete psychopath isolates the fatal flaw. Victor knows turf and money mean literally nothing. To break a man, you have to destroy his emotional anchors. He openly laughs at Dante's new attachment, calling the innocent waitress a massive liability. Just look at Dante's body language here. A tiny shift in his posture signals he is ready to die. The goons raise their guns, and Dante does zero to defend himself. Up above on the catwalk, the horrifying truth finally clicks in Arya's tearful eyes. Her protector did not show up to fight. He picked this foggy graveyard specifically to be executed. The tragedy of love is a heavy burden. It often turns us into willing martyrs for those who never asked for our sacrifice. To stop a point-blank execution, you need absolute chaos. Throwing out all logic, Arya grabs a heavy chunk of scrap metal. Her hands are shaking as she chucks it at the high-voltage terminal 20 feet away. The impact sets off a massive chain reaction of system failures. Crazy loud sirens start blaring, Blinding security lights violently flash across the pitch-black zone. This sensory overload completely shatters the Mafia squad's formation, scattering the hitmen. Victor backs away into the fog, screaming in blind rage. Down below, Dante's eyes snap up and lock right onto her shadow. Bro goes from pure shock to absolute fury before scrambling to move. It teaches us a vital, grounding lesson. Sometimes, the only way to save a doomed life is to completely shatter the rules of the game. The camera tracks her frantic sprint down the rusted scaffolding. She is totally out of breath, hands torn up from the jagged iron. Busting through the exit, she crashes right into Dante's chest. Bro immediately starts yelling, totally unhinged, because her showing up ruined his sacrifice. She screams back that she was just trying to save him, but he is having none of it. All around them, the zone turns into absolute bedlam as security teams roll in. Realizing they have 2 seconds to bounce, Dante grabs her arm and drags her through a dark service hallway. They bust outside just as Marco drifts a black getaway van to a halt. True survival often demands a heavy price. We must learn to abandon our rigid pride and allow ourselves to be rescued by the people we swore to protect. A suffocating silence takes over the van for a minute of pure agony. Streetlights flash through the tinted windows, highlighting their tragic dynamic. Dante snaps, dropping a raw psychological bomb. He straight up admits it was a premeditated suicide mission, happily sacrificing his own life to keep her safe. The dude is fiercely agitated. On response, R goes full boss mode, aggressively rejecting the damsel in distress label. She refuses to sit on the sidelines while he takes bullets for her. Dante stubbornly doubles down, insisting he is the sole protector, literally incapable of understanding her need to fight. It is a painful reminder. When we love someone deeply, denying them the right to fight beside us is just another subtle form of emotional imprisonment. The illusion of safety shatters when Marco drops a catastrophic update. Pay close attention, because this is the turning point. While the pier showdown happened, Victor's crew launched a devastating raid on Dante's warehouse. But the lost cash means nothing. Marco hands over a tablet showing the aftermath of Aria's wrecked apartment. Her beautiful art is shredded, with a chilling threat painted in red on her walls. The camera zooms in on Dante's icy dead stare. He brushes off the loss of her artwork instantly, reducing everything to bare minimum survival. Victor just started a total war. We learn a bitter lesson here. In the face of absolute annihilation, all of our precious material attachments fade into meaningless ash, leaving only the raw desperation to keep breathing. The mental regression we see in Dante here is terrifying but totally expected. He immediately flips the switch to full Mafia war mode. His voice goes completely flat as he orders Marco to unleash every hit squad they have, demanding they burn Victor's empire to the ground. When Aria breaks down, begging for the human guy she fell in love with, he straight up tells her that guy was a fake. All those warm vibes vanish, replaced by the dark void she saw the first day they met. The loving protector is dead, and the ruthless, sociopathic hitman is back in the driver's seat. It is a haunting reflection of how trauma works. The monsters we bury never truly die. They merely sleep, waiting for the perfect moment of devastating pain to break their chains and return to the surface. Dante puts up freezing cold emotional walls, telling her she has zero right to ask for mercy. Victor, crossing the line, flipped a switch in his brain. The camera captures Dante's hidden heartbreak as he fully embraces becoming a monster, but he gives her one tragic promise. If she is still waiting after the bloodbath, he will try to fake being human for her again. Arriving at his mansion, He initiates maximum lockdown, stripping away her freedom. He casually calls his exit a dark hunt, refusing to say when he will return. In a desperate move, her shaking hands grab her face, forcing him to look at her. We must understand this truth. In moments of sheer darkness, a single loving touch is often the only tether keeping a fractured soul from drifting entirely into the abyss. Stick with me here, because we are watching a psychological meltdown. See Arya begging Dante not to lose his soul. It is a tragic mirror of her own mind breaking. That tearful kiss is not a romantic trope, it is her clinging to reality. Stuck in this mansion guarded by armed goons, while a mafia war pops off, she spends the first hour pacing and the second staring at a dead phone. By hour 3, her traumatized brain needs an outlet. She finds art supplies and violently slashes red paint across the canvas. It is a massive physical purge of her internal screaming, and lasting right up until the phone finally rings at 4 in the morning. Being locked away teaches us a brutal truth. Sometimes, the suffocating silence is much louder than the violent chaos it hides. Yo, let's unpack this insane phone call, because the vibes are absolutely unhinged. Dante's voice is completely cooked, sounding like he hasn't slept in days. He's out here casually dropping body counts and burned down warehouses like he's reading a grocery list. Arya is panicking, asking if he's hurt, but my guy just brushes it off. That is a massive psychological red flag, bro. He drops the bomb that it'll take a week to pull Victor out, and you can literally feel her panic spiking. She's crying, begging for her normal life back, but Dante has already turned her into a shiny possession. He just needs to keep breathing. Look, here's the real talk for today. When love turns into this kind of toxic obsession, keeping you safe is just a fancy way of saying you're locked up in a permanent prison. Bro, did you catch that crack in the Don's voice? This dude usually has ice in his veins, but right now, he is slipping. He tries to play it off, framing her survival as some massive personal favor, which is peak emotional manipulation. Arya is out here crying and nodding along, basically speed-running Stockholm Syndrome. She buries her own need to escape, just to keep her captor happy. Once he hangs up, she stares at her canvas, and those crazy red brush strokes literally scream how fractured her mind is right now. 5 more days of isolation is going to completely wreck her. It just proves a brutal life lesson. Sometimes we willingly lock our own cages because the absolute chaos of the outside world feels way more terrifying than the one holding the key. Stick with me here, because this isolation is no joke. Arya is living in absolute limbo, watching the world through a bulletproof window like a fish in a tank. You have Marco playing the silent babysitter, tossing her food and filtered news. Meanwhile, the clueless media calls this mafia bloodbath a simple gang war. Dante's nightly calls are her only grip on reality. But bro, even he is losing the plot. His voice sounds less human and more like a predator backed into a corner. The guy she cared for is gone, replaced by a paranoid control freak. If there's one thing to learn from watching her break down, it's this. The absolute worst damage doesn't come from the physical fights. The deepest scars always come from the silent, agonizing wars we end up losing inside our own heads. Day 6 rolls around and Marco looks absolutely destroyed. One look at his stiff posture, and you know the plot is thickening. Vittorio has locked himself inside a literal fortress with snipers, making a direct hit impossible without getting everyone taken out. So, Marco drops the absolute worst nuke imaginable. Get this, Dante is actually thinking about trading Arya to Vittorio to stop the bloodshed. If the enemy gets her, the Mafia war ends. Bruh, you have to watch her face in this scene. Her whole universe just completely flatlines. It is wild, but it hits us with a seriously brutal truth bomb. No matter how much you trust someone, sometimes the toughest life lesson is realizing the exact person who swore to protect you might be the one forced to feed you directly to the wolves. Let's talk about how insanely savage this ultimatum is. Vittorio wants Dante's whole criminal empire burned to the ground. When the reality of this betrayal finally smacks Arya in the face, her legs just give out. She drops into a chair, whispering in pure denial that Dante would never sell her out like that. But Marco isn't sugarcoating anything. He shoves the brutal facts right in her face. The lost cash, the massive body count. She feels like nothing but a cheap bargaining chip. But then Marco flips the script with an even darker twist. Dante isn't trading her to save his mob boss status. He's doing it to guarantee she doesn't end up in a body bag. It is a massive reality check for us all. Sometimes the ultimate, most selfless act of love looks exactly like the most brutal, heartbreaking betrayal you could ever experience. The camera zooms in on Marco as he exposes this mastermind trap. Vittorio literally found the one weak spot in the Don's armor, and he is going to press it until everything shatters. Arya just zones out, leaning her head against the freezing glass. Down on the street, normal people are walking around with iced coffees, completely clueless that real-life monsters are plotting right above them. It is a wild reminder, guys. Our absolute worst, world-ending tragedies are completely invisible to the strangers passing by. Arya asks Marco, sounding a line totally hollowed out, what her life as a hostage would even be like. And Marco keeps it 100% real. He tells her Vittorio will keep her alive, but only to use her as a permanent, suffocating chokehold on Dante forever. The tension in that room is so thick you could cut it with a knife. If Arya stays in hiding, this Mafia war is going to leave everyone 6 feet under. In the dark, she starts coping by thinking about Dante's big emotional confession, remembering how he said she cured his years of cold-blooded numbness. It is crazy how her brain weaponizes her own trauma, tricking her into playing the tragic hero. She tries hoping Dante will pull a miracle out of nowhere, but the second she is left alone, pure panic takes over. Her hands are visibly shaking as she punches in Vittorio's burner number. She is making a massive, reckless play, and there is a heavy life lesson tucked right here. Our desperate, burning need to save the people we love is usually the exact thing that pushes us directly into the open arms of the villain. The phone rings 3 times, and the suspense is literally giving me anxiety. When Vittorio picks up, his voice has that ice-cold, creepy calm of a top-tier sociopath. He actually calls her the waitress, just to mock her and flex his power, reminding her she is completely out of her depth. But Arya isn't backing down. She grips that phone so hard her knuckles turn white and demands a face-to-face meeting. She straight up refuses to be a helpless pawn in their Mafia chess match. She offers herself up, taking full control of her own downfall. Vittorio actually laughs because he is way too curious to ignore the one girl who somehow melted the Don's frozen heart. This scene drops a huge truth on us. Real courage isn't about not being terrified. It is about shaking in your boots and choosing to stare the monster down anyway. Boom. The power dynamic just totally flipped. Vittorio actually agrees to meet. Arya picks the Art Institute at high noon, banking on a massive crowd to keep her safe. It is a smart play, but you can hear Vittorio smirking through the phone, totally mocking her beginner-level strategy. He gives her one rule. If he spots even one of Dante's goons, it is game over for everybody. He hangs up, and Arya immediately starts shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline crash hits her like a freight train, man. She is locked in now. But before she can even catch her breath, her phone lights up again. It is Dante, and he is absolutely raging. You can literally feel his fury vibrating through the screen. It is a brutal reminder for all of us. Making the brave choice is only level 1. Surviving the massive fallout from that choice is where the real nightmare actually starts. You and I are going to unpack this together because things just hit max level. Dante's guys intercepted the call instantly, and Vittorio is already rubbing this betrayal in the Don's face. Through the phone, Dante sounds like a literal demon screaming at her not to leave the room. His obsession has completely derailed into pure madness, bro. He would let the city turn to ashes just to keep her locked up. But Arya leans into the mic, crying, and uses his own humanity against him. She tells him that being a real person means having the guts to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. It is heartbreaking, but it hits such a powerful life lesson. True love isn't about throwing someone in a cage just so you feel secure. It is about having the absolute, undeniable courage to finally let them walk away. These last few hours in lockup are just straight-up psychological torture. Arya turns the phone off, and the silence in that room gets ridiculously heavy. Time is just dragging on forever. Out in the hall, Marco is absolutely losing his mind, banging on the heavy door and screaming for her to open up. But she is totally checked out, curled up in the dark, dissociating from the Mafia madness outside. At 10 in the morning, she starts getting ready like she is prepping for a funeral. She puts on the exact same outfit she wore the very first night she met the Don, wearing it like emotional armor. It is wild, but it teaches us something super real. When your entire life is collapsing into absolute chaos, you desperately try to reach back and hold on to the person you used to be before the monsters ever showed up. Staring into the mirror, Arya knows she is just a terrified kid faking her bravery. Right at 10:30, she walks up to the heavy window lock. Using some shady lock-picking tricks she learned from a toxic ex, she cracks the mechanism wide open. She sneaks out onto the freezing fire escape, slipping right past Marco's elite security like an absolute ghost. Fast forward to her sitting on a packed subway car, and the contrast is just mind-blowing. She is shoulder to shoulder with regular people looking at their phones, totally clueless that she is walking into a literal Mafia death trap. It is a huge reality check for all of us. You honestly never know what kind of massive, heavy baggage the people around you are dealing with. We are probably sitting right next to silent, invisible tragedies every single day without ever noticing. Listen up, because the screech of that train perfectly matches how fast Arya is sprinting away from her old life. She walks straight into this super fancy art gallery, a place that just screams of her epic fail back in art school. She used to think splashing paint around could fix her lonely vibes. But stick with me here, because we are unpacking some absolute Mafia chaos today. The brutal lesson she is learning is that nobody is coming to play hero. If you want out of the fire, you have to build your own rescue. At 11:45, she is hiding in plain sight, using a bunch of clueless tourists as meat shields. She stares down those massive doors, sweating absolute bullets. Then, right at noon, the absolute boss of the Underworld walks in like he owns the place. Just look at the insane body language in this scene. Victor rolls up completely solo, rocking a charcoal suit that basically works like Mafia armor. He sits right next to her, and the light hits this gnarly scar on his jaw. A total receipt for his absolute savage past. He is not even looking at her, which is just peak disrespect. He knows full well that Dante has goons hiding in the crowd, trying to blend in with the tourists like absolute amateurs. But Victor just gives this twisted little smirk. Arya drops her pathetic lie, and boom, the trap is set. The brutal reality here is that slapping on a mask of fake confidence is never going to save you from a top-tier predator who already knows exactly where your weak spots are. Victor finally turns to look at her, and I am telling you, his stare is basically a surgical laser. He spots every single detail, from her trembling lip to her heart practically beating out of her neck. To a ruthless boss like him, people are literally just pawn pieces on a board. He leans back, totally chilled out, and actually roasts her for acting tough. He straight up calls her a little mouse who escaped her tower just to feed herself to a snake. He leans in close, smelling like expensive cologne and danger, asking what her master plan is. When she whispers that she just wants peace, he laughs this empty, bone-chilling laugh. It is wild but true. Begging for peace is a total waste of breath when you are dealing with a guy who absolutely thrives on war. All right, hold up, because this is the exact moment everything flips. Arya starts rattling off the massive damage Dante has done. 3 burned down warehouses, 12 bodies dropped, and insane amounts of cash gone up in smoke. She tries to sound like a boss, but her hands are shaking like crazy. Victor does not even blink. He sees right through her fake boss energy to the panicked girl underneath. He realizes she does not actually care about stopping the mob war. She is literally taking a bullet for the man who kept her locked up, offering to hand over Dante's entire empire on a silver platter. It is honestly so tragic. Think about it. People will completely destroy the people they love the most, fully believing that their toxic moves are the only way to save them. The tension here is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Shaking like a leaf, she slides a folded paper across the table. That tiny sheet holds $30 million. Dante gave her his secret offshore accounts just to keep her safe, which is a massive rookie mistake driven by toxic love. Victor keeps his poker face, but you can see his eyes go totally dark with pure greedy villain energy. She stares back at him, honestly thinking she's buying a clean exit for her man. She thinks pulling Dante's teeth will stop the wolves from eating him alive. But let us be real for a second. Showing your soft underbelly to a literal monster is never going to get you mercy. A top-tier villain like Victor does not leave happy survivors in his wake. He only leaves absolute wreckage. This whole power play is absolutely legendary. Arya is basically trading a whole Mafia empire just to keep Dante breathing. Right next to them, clueless tourists are taking selfies, having zero idea a massive Underworld deal is going down. Victor leans in, dropping his voice to this smooth but lethal whisper. He tells her straight up that Dante is never going to forgive her for this epic backstab, and she just eats it. She is totally fine with Dante hating her guts, as long as he does not end up in a body bag. Victor pockets that paper with this super twisted smirk. She begs him to promise, and he just gives this fake little nod. The tough takeaway is that putting your blind trust in a complete psycho is just hitting the self-destruct button. The vibe gets even darker as Victor drops his ultimate villain threat. He straight up tells her that when he finally ends them, he is going to make Dante watch her go down first. Right before he dips into the crowd, he hits her with one last mental strike. He reminds her she has tossing her life in the trash for a dude who only ever used her. The second Victor is gone, her adrenaline completely crashes. Arya just slumps against the wall, breaking down and crying her eyes out. She literally just sold out her mafia boss boyfriend, totally convinced she is pulling off some heroic rescue mission. It is a super bitter pill to swallow, but sometimes the most absolute garbage decisions we make in life are the ones we do because we genuinely thought we were helping. Now she is stuck in the back of her ride, and her phone is blowing up like crazy. 17 missed calls and 32 panic texts from Dante. His tight grip on the underworld is totally falling apart. She cannot even handle his freak out, so she calls his muscle instead. They tell her the security cameras already caught her little coffee date with the enemy. Suddenly, she just goes completely numb and tells them to drive her back. The tension in that car is absolutely insane. The mob guards are staring at her like she is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. They roll up to the mansion, and the massive front doors are just wide open, like a horror movie. It is crazy how we build these massive walls to stay safe, but the worst danger always just walks right through the front door. She walks into the massive living room, and Dante looks absolutely wrecked. The man aged 10 years in an hour. His eyes look totally dead, and his suit is covered in dried blood from whatever chaos just popped off. His famous, cool persona is completely gone. In this super creepy, quiet voice, he tells his guards to bounce. You might be wondering how fast a mafia boss figures out he got played. Literally, instantly. He practically begs her to say it was fake, just totally desperate for her to be loyal. But the second she admits it, he goes ice cold. Turns out, he watched his bank accounts hit zero the minute she sat down with Victor. It is a harsh truth, but once you smash someone's trust like that, there is absolutely no amount of love that can ever glue the pieces back together. The epic fail of her plan finally hits her. Dante spells it out. $30 million vanished. 15 years of bleeding to build a mafia empire totally deleted in minutes. Aria tries to defend herself, whispering that Victor promised a clean slate. Dante absolutely loses it, smashing a lamp into the wall in pure rage. Victor already called to troll him, bragging he will wipe out Dante's crew using the money she gave him. Aria literally collapses. Her brain short-circuits as she just mumbles that he promised. Dante starts laughing, but it is this cracked, horrifying sound of a man who lost everything. The lesson here is brutal. Feeding a toxic beast does not tame it. You are just handing the monster the exact teeth it needs to eat you alive. The vibe drops to absolute zero as their relationship is officially cancelled. Dante looks at the girl he risked it all for and tells her that her little mercy mission was basically a loaded gun. He points straight at the door, kicking her out of the mansion and out of his life forever. She is still shaking her head, completely refusing to let go of their toxic romance. But when he looks back at her, the guy she fell for is history. His eyes are just blank. He reads her a laundry list of her massive failures, especially the insane ego it took to think she could outsmart the top villain. Love is wild, but it is totally useless if you do not have any common sense. Her obsession with trying to play hero instead of just trusting his game plan is exactly what caused this epic downfall. Dante ignores her crying and hits her with the brutal facts. He calls her out, saying this was not even about saving his life. It was all about her wanting to feel like the main character. She wanted power in a mafia world that kept her sidelined. But by trying to outplay Victor, she literally burned Dante's empire to the ground. This right here is the absolute peak drama. He does not even yell. He just starts counting backwards from 60. This robotic, terrifying countdown bouncing off the walls. The reality finally smacks her in the face. She absolutely destroyed the man she loved. Barely able to walk, she drags herself toward the exit. She drops one final apology, but he does not even care anymore. The toughest truth out there is that love does not fix everything. Sometimes it just ruins it all. Bro, the sound of that front door closing is straight up nightmare fuel. It sounds exactly like a stone tomb sealing shut forever. Marco shows zero emotion as he shoves Aria into a getaway car. Her safe zone is officially wiped off the map. He dumps her in some sketchy motel, drops straight cash, and leaves her in the dead silence. That is when Aria absolutely breaks. She hits the floor and just loses it, sobbing uncontrollably. For 2 days, she starves herself, staring at the television, while the news broadcasts the massive, bloody street war she literally started. It is absolute chaos out there. But here is the real-life lesson we have to take away from this mess. You can never outrun the consequences of your own choices. Sooner or later, the ghosts you create are going to pull up right at your front door. Meanwhile, Victor is moving like an absolute plague, wiping out Dante's crew like a starving wolf. Dante fights back, but it is a totally doomed fight. On day 3 of Aria hiding out, the motel door swings open. Marco walks in and silently hands her a phone. You and I really need to unpack this insane plot twist together. Dante, the ultimate Mafia king who built his empire on silence, literally walks into the police station and confesses to everything. He hands the cops the nails for his own coffin. But do not get it twisted. This is no redemption arc. It is a crazy calculated strike to drag Victor into the flames with him. Here is the reality check we all need to remember. Sometimes, the only way to take down the devil is to lock every single door and set your own house on fire. Marco drops the hardest truth bomb here, explaining Dante's insane scorched earth strategy. The boss is literally burning his own empire to the ground, so Victor inherits a kingdom of ashes. Aria is shaking, totally unable to process this toxic spite. Dante chose a freezing prison cell just to starve out his enemy. When Aria begs for one last chance to see the man who ruined her life, Marco hits her with a flat no. Boom, shut down completely. He just points to a thick envelope on the desk. It is her forced ticket to Los Angeles. This tragic mess leaves us with one major life lesson to remember. You can never cure a straight-up predator with love and affection. Sometimes the only way to actually survive a monster is to find the guts to turn your back and walk away forever. Look at Aria holding this letter. All that cash I stuffed inside the envelope. It is a masterclass in toxic psychological control, dressed up like a romantic final. Goodbye. Her eyes are hollow as she reads his twisted words. Dante writes like it is a literal funeral speech. He spins his surrender into a noble sacrifice, claiming ultimate power just ends in dying alone. Sure, he destroyed his syndicate to wreck Victor, but the real plot twist is the invisible leash he just slapped on Aria. By playing the martyr, he guarantees she stays completely hooked on his ghost forever. It is an absolutely brutal reality check for anyone watching. The most dangerous cages out there are never made of solid steel bars. They are built purely out of misplaced gratitude and blind, tragic devotion. A tear hits the letter, totally blurring the ink. Dante shifts from a fake apology straight into romanticizing his own toxic poison. He calls her a beautiful anomaly in his ruined kingdom, pulling the trap tighter. He commands her to live in the sunlight, acting like his cruel abandonment is some generous pardon. Reading his confession that his love was never enough, Aria just loses it. Driven crazy by this massive trauma bond, she corners Marco. The second she finds out Auntie Dante is at the Federal Transfer Center, her survival instincts just delete themselves. We seriously need to recognize a terrifying truth. True Healthy love builds a completely solid foundation. A toxic attachment just builds a bonfire, blinding you until you willingly jump right into the flames. Come with me into the depressing walls of this federal lockup. You can practically feel the freezing chill in the air. Arya's desperate need to see him is the ultimate tragic story of a moth flying into a bonfire. The steel door screeches open, and Dante steps into the harsh light. He is covered in bruises in a prison jumpsuit, a massive fall from his Mafia King days. But bro, his dark eyes are still pure predator. He sits at the metal table and hits her with dead silence, forcing her to carry the emotional weight of seeing him again. It is a chilling reminder of a harsh life lesson. Real power is never loud and flashy. The person in control is usually the one staying completely silent, making you bleed out emotionally just to fill the empty room. The dead silence shatters when Arya yells that he just threw his entire life in the garbage. Dante's reply is an ice-cold blade. He whispers that a 20-year sentence is way better than a wooden box. Arya is hyperventilating, screaming that he is literally playing God with her reality. Does the boss blink? Not at all. He flat out says his insane control is the only reason she is still breathing. He watches her cry and coldly brings up her past betrayal, saying her rebellion only put a massive target on her back. By burning his mob empire down, he wiped out the threat, but chained her to his memory forever. Here is a massive truth bomb for your own life. Sometimes the people claiming to protect you are really just building a fancier prison, making absolutely sure they are the only ones holding the key. Dante does not even raise his voice as he maps out her new fake life. Forged papers, untraceable cash, becoming a ghost out in Los Angeles. Arya completely shatters. Her sobbing echoes off the prison walls as she begs to wait for him. Dante's stare is pure, ruthless boss. He actually calls her loyalty a sickness, saying that waiting 20 years is just locking herself in another cage. Then he brutally twists the knife, weaponizing his supposed love to force her to leave. Watching her twist in agony as she fights his orders is wild. It is a horrific look at how trauma bonds actually work. Do not ever forget this essential lesson. Real love should never ask you to surrender your soul. When you mistake toxic manipulation for romance, you end up throwing your whole life away just to keep a monster's fading ghost company. Look closely at Arya's face here. Under those prison lights, you see Dante's jaw twitch for a split second. It is the only proof he is breaking inside. For one heartbeat, Arya snaps out of the trance. She realizes that bowing to his memory will only turn her into a literal zombie. She gets furious and starts spitting venom, calling out his fake hero complex. But Dante, handcuffed to the table, coldly drops the biggest plot twist. He admits his darkest secret. None of this was ever about keeping her safe. He is freezing her in time to feed his own selfish ego. He cuts her off so she does not get ruined, completely robbing her of her free will. Here is a bitter pill we all have to swallow in life. Absolutely, no one has the right to hijack your story, just they can play the tragic hero in theirs. Dante drops his voice to a whisper. He claims he can handle rotting in a cell, but watching her get destroyed is his absolute breaking point. Arya is shaking, totally mocking this boring life he expects her to live, like finding a safe boyfriend and getting old. Then Dante's eyes soften. He literally commands her to go live in the light. When she asks if he will choke on his regrets, his quiet answer is an absolute masterclass in manipulation. He keeps his hooks buried deep in her heart while shoving her out the door. The guard grabs his shoulder, and time is up. Dante stands and whispers a tiny thank you, perfectly sealing her tragic fate. Guys, Remember this dark but necessary life lesson. Sometimes the softest, most romantic words forge the absolute heaviest, most unbreakable chains you will ever wear. Before the doors slide shut, Dante breathes out his thanks. He tells her she broke through the ice in his soul, saying her love brought him back to life. Aria is sobbing, admitting his twisted obsession was the only fire making her feel alive. Dante throws out a fleeting fantasy of them living a normal life. Aria gives a shattered smile. She knows taking away their shared trauma would completely kill the spark between them. Bam! The steel door slams shut. She walks out into the freezing Chicago wind, seeing Marco waiting by a black sedan, and staring at the violent city that ruined her. She accepts her shiny new cage and her forced exile to Los Angeles. We have to accept a bitter truth about survival here. You can never, ever truly heal in the exact same environment that completely broke you into pieces. Watch the final illusion shatter. In the dim motel room, Aria decrypts a hidden message, and her face goes pale. The depth of Dante's planning is absolutely terrifying. Those massive secrets she risked her life to leak? 100% fake. He saw her betrayal coming and played her savior complex to feed her a lie. He stripped away her power, making her rebellion pointless, yet still had the nerve to praise her for trying. The sheer scale of his brain games crushes her. She hits the floor, busting into breathless, manic laughter that bounces off the cheap walls. She is permanently stuck in his twisted mind. Stick with me, because here is a haunting lesson for you and me. The darkest betrayals never come from enemies holding guns. They come from people who weaponize your own empathy into an inescapable trap. Look at how the framing totally shifts here. You and I are witnessing the exact second Aria's entire reality shatters. Her nervous system realizes the plot twist before her brain even catches up. Dante literally played the ruthless Mafia villain just to protect her from her own dangerous empathy. Wild, right? A message lights up the screen, admitting that letting her walk was his ultimate sacrifice. Dripping with tears, she whispers a quiet vow to the empty room. His final order: do not paint him as a monster, but as a bleeding man. She drags herself to the easel, pouring all that raw trauma straight onto the canvas. Listen, here is a major truth check. Sometimes, the only way you survive a totally crushing grief is to build something beautiful out of the absolute wreckage that outlives the pain itself. The camera pulls way back, and boom, we see a canvas violently split between blinding light and pure darkness. It is a crazy, tragic map of their doomed romance. Aria is drifting like an absolute ghost until dawn bleeds through the blinds, using every brushstroke to stitch her fried nerves back together. Leaving the wet paint behind, she totally dips. That freezing Chicago skyline fades out like a graveyard for her dismantled soul, while Los Angeles waits to host her brand new life. Meanwhile, trapped behind cold iron, Dante is pacing his cell like a caged beast. They survived the Mafia fire, but they walk away completely rewired. It drops a heavy lesson on us. You might survive a shattered heart, but you will never be the exact same person who walked into those flames. The scene opens on an insanely suffocating apartment in Los Angeles, harsh sunlight slicing through the thick dust. We are watching Aria try to survive the deafening quiet of her new life. Honestly, framing this massive Mafia trauma as some dark romance is the only trick keeping her breathing right now. She wanders the concrete until her feet bleed, desperately trying to remember how normal people act, but the crushing silence pushes her to the brink. By week 1, she literally has to bleed the poison out, forcing her to buy a giant stack of blank canvases. It highlights a seriously dangerous reality of survival. Our brains will always find a sneaky way to shield us from total collapse, even if that means painting a ruthless mob boss in the softest, most forgiving light imaginable. Picture the stark shadows of a single bulb swinging in her makeshift studio. The smell of turpentine fills the room. For 3 straight days, Aria sits totally paralyzed in front of the empty canvas. When the brush finally strikes, it moves in violent, desperate slashes. Yet, she flat out refuses to paint the Mafia predator who ruined her. As the camera pushes in tight, we hit with a tragically idealized version of Dante. She paints the broken boy she actually wanted to heal. Capturing the deep fracture in his dark soul. Hanging the wet portrait up, her knees completely give out, and a raw sob rips through her chest. It is a profound reflection of grief. We often cling to the absolute, softest versions of the people who destroy us, simply because the unvarnished truth is way too heavy to carry alone. Let us look closely at how survival plays out on screen here. You and I both know that deep trauma always demands a massive outlet. Aria spends her late nights painting the cold architecture of her nightmare. The shadowed restaurant, the suffocating Mafia safe house. She takes her silent terror and traps it in oil and pigment. A month into this crazy cycle, she grabs a quiet job at a local art gallery, hiding behind a desk, just trying to feel normal again. But the director, a woman with razor-sharp intuition, takes one single look at her portfolio. She instantly spots the terrified girl running for her life, buried beneath those heavy brushstrokes. Here is a hard truth we all eventually face. Survival is never about magically fixing your scars, but rather discovering exactly how to wield them. The camera rests on Carmen, staring at the canvases and realizing the raw emotion is practically screaming off the fabric. For 3 months, Aria maintains this fragile illusion of an ordinary life. But then comes the massive cinematic pivot. 2 a.m. A harsh metallic ring violently cuts through the dark apartment. It is Sarah Chen, a federal prosecutor calling from Chicago. The exact second she speaks Dante's name, watch the way the blood physically drains from Aria's face. Her breathing completely stops, and her hands tremble against the receiver like crazy. This intense scene teaches us a brutal reality. Geography can never cure a broken spirit. You can pack your bags, change your name, and flee to the farthest edge of the map, but you can never outrun your own mind. Notice the unbearable tension locking up her muscles. Hear her. Her first terrified whisper into the phone is not even a question about her own safety. It is a desperate plea to know if the mob boss who ruined her is okay. The prosecutor pushes hard, demanding her testimony to finally dismantle Dante's syndicate. But Aria just stares across the dim room at that haunting portrait. She shakes her head, hot tears spilling down her cheeks, rationalizing that he is the one who let her live. She is willing to burn her own future to the ground rather than betray the phantom she still loves. It delivers a vital lesson. The most inescapable prisons in our lives are never built with steel. They are built out of our own misplaced, desperate gratitude toward the exact people who locked us inside. The prosecutor tries pure logic, listing the lives destroyed by the syndicate, but trauma bonds are totally deaf to reason. The film cuts to a maximum security prison. Even behind thick glass, Dante still pulls the strings like a puppet master. He funnels a calculated message through his lawyer, telling Aria her testimony is not a betrayal, but an act of truth. He plays her mind like an instrument, knowing the exact frequency required to make her bend. Feeling that invisible collar tighten, she finally caves, but dictates her own wild terms. She does not beg for protection. Instead, she negotiates to shave years off the sentence of the monster who broke her. The people who study our hearts the closest are always the ones best equipped to tear them apart. When the government refuses to guarantee Dante's safety, her apartment walls physically seem to shrink. Aria drowns in a suffocating panic. She dials Carmen, the lens focusing on her white-knuckled grip. Her voice fractures as she admits this clawing desire to just feel normal. She wants to bury the Chicago Mafia nightmare under the California sand. But then she whispers the paralyzing truth. He is already in her bloodstream. Dante dictates her artistic strokes, her paranoid thoughts, the very beating of her heart. We watch a woman realize that running from her own shadow is an unwinnable war. You and I can see how this mirrors our own struggles. We spend exhausting energy trying to bury our ugliest chapters, completely forgetting that buried trauma never vanishes. It only mutates silently in the dark. Aria finally speaks the devastating reality into the open air. She fled thousands of miles, yet the phantom of that mob boss still colonizes her brain. Let us pause here, because you and I can learn something profound from how Carmen reacts. She refuses to offer empty pity. Instead, she looks Aria dead in the eyes and rips away the illusion. She explains that the deepest human connections are rarely clean. They are chaotic, messy, and deeply destructive. Carmen asks the only question that matters. Are you prepared to endure this suffocating silence for the rest of your life? The camera holds tightly on Aria's trembling jaw. It teaches us a universal law. Escaping your zip code only delays the inevitable collision with your own soul. 2 weeks later, she is on a flight straight back to Chicago. Stepping onto the freezing Chicago tarmac hits her nervous system like a punch. The skyline looks exactly the same, saturated with brutal mafia memories. But watch the camera closely. It highlights a cold, forged steel resolve in her eyes. That terrified girl is officially dead. Aria pushes through the heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse, her spine totally rigid. Taking the stand, she intentionally bleeds out every drop of emotion. She delivers nothing but surgical facts as the state dismantles Dante's Underworld empire. Cornered, the defense attorneys launch a vicious character assassination. They frame her not as a survivor, but as a crazy, vengeful ex-lover. It reminds us of an ugly reality. The minute you bravely step forward to own your history, someone will always try to rewrite your narrative to save themselves. The defense attorney invades her space, leaning in dangerously close. His words drip with venom, accusing her of selling Dante to a rival mob syndicate. The gallery holds its breath. The lens pushes into a tight close-up of Aria's exhausted face, capturing the twisted math of a damaged soul. Her voice is painfully quiet. Here comes the massive plot twist. She frankly admits to the absolute betrayal. She confesses she deliberately burned his Mafia empire to the ground for one reason alone: to save him from being murdered. She knew his blinding ego was walking him straight into a casket, so she executed his legacy just to keep his lungs working. It is a shockingly beautiful display of vulnerability. It proves how severe trauma warps our natural instincts, forcing us to annihilate the things we cherish most, just to ensure they survive the night. Let us step right into this absolute circus of a courtroom together. That shattered confession hangs so heavy in the air, instantly suffocating the defense. The jury is totally stunned. They do not see a vindictive mafia mastermind anymore. They see a girl profoundly scarred by a world built on pure violence. Cue the cinematic montage of 3 grueling weeks of testimony. She sits under those harsh lights, mechanically dismantling his criminal empire. But notice her strategy here. She fiercely guards her eyes. One single second of eye contact with Dante, and she shatters. The gavel drops, locking up 15 mobsters. The lesson here? True strength is not about walking through fire unharmed. Sometimes survival just means knowing exactly where not to look. The absolute second those heavy courthouse doors slam shut behind her, the old Mafia life violently crashes back in. Marco quietly drops a bomb. The fallen king demands an audience. Are you kidding me? She actually walks right through the towering metal gates of the federal penitentiary, willingly stepping back into a cage to face the guy who built her internal prison. Through the smudged glass, Dante looks physically hollowed out, yet his dark eyes radiate this terrifying, triumphant calm. He gives her the slow, deliberate smile of a predator whose math was absolutely flawless. She gave him an 8-year sentence, but he totally won the war for her mind. It teaches us a brutal truth about toxic bonds. Some chains are never truly broken. They are just rearranged in the dark. You and I have to look closely at the insane power dynamics in this suffocating little room. Arya sits perfectly rigid, demanding to know why he called her here. I swear, the shadows literally bend toward Dante as he speaks. His voice is a total velvet trap, dropping emotional validation like it is nothing. He actually praises her devotion to the truth, which is wild, coming from a guy built entirely on lies. The harsh light hits his face as he drops a massive plot twist. He has been watching her art from behind bars, knowing he is still the dark sun she orbits. He tells her to keep painting him, playing the tragic muse instead of the monster he is. The lesson here is chilling. Even without a mafia empire, a narcissist will claw through dirt to stay the center of your world. Arya narrows her eyes, scanning the cold glass between them for any sign of a trap. Dante does not even blink. With effortless villain energy, he completely flips the script on his own prison sentence. He paints this iron cage not as payback for a lifetime of violence, but as some tragic, romantic obstacle keeping their souls apart. He claims he will not demand her loyalty for 8 years, yet he manipulates every word to make sure she never actually moves on. And guess what? Arya lets her shoulders drop. She willfully accepts the chains, bracing for the world to turn against her. But the lesson of true captivity is blindingly simple. When a trauma bond goes deep enough, the noise of the outside world fades to absolute nothingness. The camera pushes right up into Arya's face, revealing this haunting mask of total emotional shutdown. When someone warns her about the psychological ruin waiting for her, she just gives this slow, dark nod. Talk about the tragic endpoint of prolonged captivity. They spend their allowed hour making the completely bizarre sound normal. Dante casually chats about his prison routine and his sudden craving for philosophy. Notice the terrifying irony here. The ultimate mob monster is now studying the exact societal rules he used to set on fire. Arya leans right up to the glass, her voice soft but totally hooked. She promises to visit him regularly, locking herself into the steady rhythm of her own mental cage. It teaches us a deeply grim reality about pain. Some wounds never heal, they just become your daily routine. Listen to the crazy tremor in her voice as she promises to keep painting his faces, pouring her raw obsession onto the canvas. Dante eats up this confession with quiet hunger. A broken guy always needs an audience, and she just signed up to be his VIP gallery forever. She completely ignores his monstrous mafia past, offering up a raw confession of deep affection. Dante plays the game perfectly. He lowers his head, weapon himself ruined, weaponizing his vulnerability, so her protective instincts bleed for him. She bails before the tears fall. Later at the airport, Marco drops a chilling plot twist. He claims Dante's neural pathways have actually altered. The lesson here is wild but true. A relentless obsession can literally rewrite the mind of a monster. You and I need to pause right here to look at the absolute madness unfolding. Marco truly believed her hardcore devotion had neutralized Dante's self-destructive vibe, but back in her sunny California isolation, the clinical reality of Aria's behavior is shifting in real time. Her massive canvases still bleed with trauma, but a weird mental integration is taking shape. 6 months post-trial, she puts her visual case studies in a public gallery. One sharp critic sees right through the thick paint. They drop the ultimate truth bomb. This is not a portrait of a healthy romance, but a brutal, honest documentation of pure survival mode. It leaves us with a haunting lesson for our own lives. Sometimes, survival just means learning to paint the monsters that live rent-free inside your head. The camera lens zooms onto Aria. Her intense artwork is a physical manifestation of her lingering Mafia trauma. She manages to sell 3 pieces. It is not enough cash to buy true independence, but more than enough to validate her distorted reality. She actually mails the photographic proof straight to Dante. His reply arrives on cheap prison paper, yet his handwriting is terrifyingly perfect. He writes about his immense pride, asking how it felt to sell their history for $3,000. Her response is a textbook red flag of captive psychology. She calls him a miracle. She thanks the literal architect of her ruin for pulling her back to humanity, claiming she needed his care to feel free. The hardest lesson to learn is how easily a broken heart confuses heavy chains with true safety. Their letters turn into a slow drip of psychological reinforcement, a steady heartbeat once a month. They dance around the blood-stained Mafia past, projecting their minds into a fake future. 12 long months pass in this agonizing suspension. Then, boom! Dante uses a monitored phone call to shatter the calm. He announces a sudden transfer to a minimum security prison in California, framing it as a choice that depends entirely on her permission. You can almost hear the violent spike of Aria's pulse. He lets a heavy, calculated silence fall before setting the final emotional hook. He whispers that this move places him physically closer to her, if she truly wants it. Naturally, she gasps out a desperate yes. The lesson here is brutal. A trauma bond will always force you to beg for the very poison that is killing you. Stick with me here, because this is where the tension becomes totally unbearable. Dante warns her that his proximity will tear her new life apart, but Aria leans straight into the fire, a classic trauma response. Dante offers a low, practiced laugh, claiming he simply missed her voice. Fast forward to March. The new facility is 3 hours north of Los Angeles. Aria walks into the visiting room, vibrating between sheer terror and blinding euphoria. There is no reinforced glass here, just an open table forcing unfiltered, raw contact. Dante looks disarmingly genuine. His mob boss pathology seems washed away by the sterile room. They sit across from each other, entirely motionless. No words, just a heavy, suffocating visual hunger. Remember this vital truth. Silence is often the loudest symptom of a desperate dependency. Watch closely as the fallen Mafia king recalibrates his dominance inside a powerless room. He greets her with a calculated, terrifying simplicity. Aria rambles about Los Angeles being a chaotic sanctuary where her old ghosts cannot find her. They fall into an intense dialogue about her art. Then, as the clock ticks down, Dante initiates a deliberate physical strike. He reaches out his hand, moving slowly to allow a flight response. But she stays perfectly still. His fingers actually trace her skin. He whispers that he has 7 years left. Then he strips his ego bare, confessing he has no empire, no loyal soldiers waiting in the dark. His grip tightens on her hand. The lesson here is profound. True power is not a golden throne. It is the chilling ability to hold a soul entirely hostage with a single touch. Look at this absolute masterclass in manipulation. Dante's jaw is literally trembling as he fakes this massive identity crisis. He is acting like his broken self is not enough for her without his dark mafia glamour. Aria completely falls for it, practically begging him to see that her new paintings prove she is loyal for life. He leans in, playing the tragic villain, whispering that she is just obsessed with a ghost, but she swallows the bait whole. He hits her with that devastating smile and softly asks if she will wait. She claims she is building an independent life, but her soul is entirely tied to his parole date. It is totally unhinged, but it leaves us with a harsh truth. All the love in the world cannot fix a relationship that is built on a toxic, poisoned foundation. Under the harsh lights, Aria finally drops the mask and admits she has zero self-worth. We are not looking at a tragic romance here. This is a total train wreck of two broken people using each other to stay standing. The years fly by, and Aria suddenly blows up in the art world, selling out to wealthy buyers. Her canvases are completely unhinged, swinging violently from deep trauma to naive hope. And the critics, they are totally blind, praising her work as brutally optimistic. She smiles for the flashing cameras, clueless about the dark reality, screaming from her own brushstrokes. But you have to learn this life lesson before it is too late. You can never achieve genuine success if you are secretly still living inside a mental cage of your own making. You and I are going to unpack this absolute madness together. Watch Dante play the system. By year 3, he scores his degrees. By year 4, this megalomaniac pivots into a mentor role, dominating a new hierarchy like a boss. By year 5, his flawless act scores him early parole. Out of nowhere, his old enforcer Marco calls Aria to announce Dante is walking free in April. The camera spins wildly as Aria literally collapses right in the middle of her studio. Marco says Dante is giving her a chance to run, offering a clean escape. She stares at her paint-covered hands, looking at the independent life she built. But here is the truth we all need to understand. Freedom is absolutely terrifying when the dark warmth of a cage is the only thing you actually know. The harsh neon lights of a cheap motel cast heavy shadows across Aria's exhausted face. She really thought she was over him. She thought she no longer needed the guy who ruined her. But that twisted trauma bond is no joke. She actively wants Amma back, tricking her brain into thinking it is a survival tactic instead of a desperate plea for rescue. The hardest lesson in life is that we often crave the exact same fire that burned us to the ground. She goes cold and to make sure she is standing right at those prison gates. For 90 sleepless days, she paints like a maniac, dropping a massive collection called Redemption. Now it is April 14th. She is parked outside the concrete walls, and her lack of sleep is hitting her like a ton of bricks. The bright sun of April 15th feels totally out of place for this dramatic showdown. Aria is frozen outside the prison perimeter, panicking in absolute silence. At 8:30 sharp, those heavy steel gates slide open. Dante steps out, rocking simple denim and a white shirt. The fallen Mafia king takes up the entire frame. He blinks against the sunlight, but then his dark eyes lock onto his target. He crosses the asphalt with terrifying speed, and she runs to meet him. He grabs her face, pulling her into an intense forehead press to instantly prove he is still the boss. It shows us something wild. Sometimes, true surrender is a willing choice driven by pure, obsessive devotion. She whispers right back to him, validating that her monster has finally returned. In a choked whisper, Arya admits she could not believe he was real until this moment. Their connection floods her brain with dopamine, rebooting a toxic 6-year trauma loop. When they pull apart, the emotional whiplash is brutal. They are laughing through bitter tears, completely unhinged. Dante straight up confesses he has zero clue how to survive out here with normal people. Arya just smirks, predicting they are going to crash and burn together. It teaches us a dark life lesson. Shared brokenness is often the strongest glue between two messed up people. They proudly call themselves a beautiful disaster. Meanwhile, Marco waits by the car like an obedient dog. Arya steps back, finally getting a good look at the megalomaniac she waited for. Stick with me, because this is where their twisted bond gets fascinating. Arya asks what his first move as a free man will be. Dante strictly demands to see the monuments sheets in his honor. He wants to walk into the archive of her obsession. When she warns him that every painting is just him, a slow, villainous smile creeps up. It is exactly what his ego craved. It leaves us with an uncomfortable life lesson. Deep down, we all secretly want to be the center of someone's universe, even if it destroys them. On the drive to Los Angeles, Dante refuses to let her go. He is hypervigilant, grabbing her face to make sure he is not dreaming. They pull up to her massive warehouse, and the second she unlocks those heavy metal doors, the fallen king stops breathing. The camera pulls back to expose walls dripping with 72 months of unhinged obsession. Every canvas is a timeline of their toxic trauma. It is the story of a mobster faking empathy and a broken girl who finally felt seen. Dante paces the room, soaking up his own godhood. For 15 agonizing minutes, nobody makes a sound. And then, the emotional dam shatters. Real tears actually fall from this hardened killer's eyes. His voice cracks as he whispers that she made his inner monster look beautiful. He spent his life destroying people, but she rebuilt his ruined soul on canvas. The real-life lesson here is that pure devotion can sometimes rewrite our darkest histories. He yanks her against his chest and sweats his eternal love in a raw, desperate whisper. Dante traces his obsession right back to that infamous night with the shattered glass. He admits her cold detachment was irresistible to his predatory brain. Now, he promises to become the guy she painted. Arya strokes his face, swearing that his mere existence is enough. They are wrapped in a beautiful delusion, rebranding their trauma as salvation. But the real world is a nightmare. Life teaches us that walking out of a cage never erases the deep scars of being locked up. Dante's nervous system is fried. He jumps at shadows and needs constant noise to sleep. Stripped of his criminal empire, he sinks into a crushing depression. Still, the former boss fights back. He grabs a quiet job at a bookshop, moves into a tiny apartment, and drags himself to exhausting therapy to finally heal. You and I know recovery is never a straight line. Climbing out of that dark hole is agonizing. Arya is battling her own massive demons. She holds her breath daily, terrified the violent Dante will return. Her peers ditch her, totally disgusted by her loyalty. She is left alone, swallowing her panic to manage his dark moods. But slowly, they start rewiring their broken habits. Fast forward a year, and Dante walks in with a rare spark in his eyes. He got accepted into a literature program, but he is shaking, convinced he is too scarred for normal students. Arya grabs his shoulders, fiercely reminding him that a boss who survived prison can easily survive a classroom. It proves an important life lesson. Their twisted pathology is still there, but they are finally writing a new story. You and I have seen broken bonds harden into a bizarre piece. 2 years later, their tragic merger is on full display. The camera pans across a gallery in New York City. Aria scored a massive solo exhibition with Dante protecting her like a dark shadow. Under the bright lights, she leans into his chest. She straight up tells the crowd that shared chaos is why her art is beautiful, swearing they built this success together. It hits us with a heavy life lesson. Sometimes, true survival means absorbing the poison until it becomes part of your own blood. She did not escape the narcissist. She took his darkness and wove it perfectly into her identity. The integration is absolute. They are totally thriving, happily functioning inside a beautifully painted cage of their own making. Let's look closely at where they finally landed. They are not magically healed because deep trauma leaves permanent scars, but somehow they function. 3 years after his release, Dante proposes at 2 a.m. in her studio. He just murmurs, "Marry me." There is zero trace of that terrifying mob boss energy. He is not staking a claim. He is offering a realistic, broken partnership. Aria laughs, wiping away tears as she calls it the worst proposal ever, but she eagerly accepts. The wedding lacks that flashy, sociopathic Mafia pageantry. It is just Marco Carmen and a few quiet witnesses. This gives us the ultimate life lesson of this saga. True recovery is never the absolute absence of trauma. It is simply the stubborn daily decision to build a life in spite of it. We open on the desert outside the prison where Dante started his wild rehabilitation arc. They are not just saying regular vows. Guys, this is a hardcore contract. Aria whispers she will truly see him, swearing to be his anchor when dark thoughts drag him under. Dante makes a wild promise in return. He swears to let her be visible, literally killing off the manipulative mob monster he used to be. He wants to be worthy of the woman who saw the broken guy underneath that Mafia pathology. The real-life lesson here is that stubborn devotion can shatter your deepest mental chains. I used to think she was just stuck in a wild trap, but Aria totally flipped the script. And the biggest plot twist ever? The former Don gets his degree and starts teaching at a community college. Fast forward, and Aria is dominating the art world. Her work blows up globally, buying them a chill house in Silver Lake. But listen, healing is never a clean break. Dante still wakes up in a cold sweat, haunted by his ruthless Mafia days, while Aria is wrapping her head around loving a former crime boss. Instead of dodging bullets, they now argue over unwashed coffee mugs. 10 years after that shattered glass kicked off this insane story, we find them on their porch. Dante is grading academic papers, while Aria sketches his face. She tells him they are living proof that a total monster can learn humanity. Here is the big life lesson for you. Embracing the raw vulnerability of being truly seen is always worth the terrifying risk of getting your heart broken. Aria drops a massive reality check. "Look at us," she says. "You went from a terrifying crime boss to a professor, and I went from an invisible waitress to a famous artist." She wonders if they turned into new people. Dante hits her with the ultimate counter. "Are we new?" he asks. "Or just the same people who finally learned how to be honest?" Guys, this is a huge mental level up for a former Don. He pulls her close, admitting he is insanely grateful she dropped that glass back then. That wild trauma was the exact fire they needed to burn away the fake masks they used to wear. She kisses him, fully claiming the real Dante Varelli. It brings us to a beautiful truth you can take with you today. Real love does not try to hide your darkest parts. It just holds a steady light right up to it. The light shifts into a golden hour glow. Dante looks at her, the hardcore mob boss exhaustion softening around his eyes. He whispers that he loves her, calling her an artist, a stubborn disaster, and the woman who taught him to be human again. You can see the rigid tension vanish from her shoulders. You and I watched these two survive absolute underworld darkness, outlasting trauma that would destroy most people. Their escape was never an easy, clean break. It took massive, painful grinding to rebuild their lives out of pure wreckage. As the camera pulls back on their quiet moment, it leaves us with a solid truth. Living an authentic, fiercely earned life is always going to be enough. When the dust finally settles, your hard-won scars are the only things that truly matter.